The autumn rain drummed against the tall windows of Thornfield Palace as Princess Catherine adjusted her black morning dress one final time. Her reflection stared back from the antique mirror, pale and solemn, the weight of the day ahead pressing down on her shoulders like a heavy cloak. Today would mark the end of an era for the Kingdom of Aldermere, and she knew that every eye would be watching how she guided the royal children through their first major public loss. The funeral of Queen Mother Isabel had drawn dignitaries from across the globe. The beloved matriarch of the royal family had been more than just a figurehead. She had been the heart that kept the monarchy connected to its people. Her passing at 93 had been peaceful, but the void she left behind seemed to echo through every corridor of the ancient palace. Catherine smoothed her hands over her dress and took a deep breath. As the Princess of Wales and mother to the future heirs, she carried responsibilities that went far beyond her own grief. Prince William had left early that morning for final security briefings, leaving her to prepare the children for what would undoubtedly be one of the most challenging days of their young lives. A soft knock at her door interrupted her thoughts. "Come in," she called, turning from the mirror. Lady Margaret Thornsbury, the children's longtime governess, entered with a respectful curtsy. Her gray hair was pulled back in a perfect chignon, and her black dress spoke of decades spent in royal service. "Your Royal Highness, the young princes and princess are ready for your inspection." Catherine nodded, feeling her heart clench slightly. George, at 15, had been trying so hard to be strong for his younger siblings. Charlotte, now 13, had been unusually quiet since learning of her great-grandmother's passing. And Louis, barely 11, still struggled to understand why the woman who had taught him to play chess and told him stories of brave knights would never do so again. "How are they managing, Lady Margaret?" Catherine asked as they walked down the portrait-lined hallway toward the children's quarters. The older woman's expression softened slightly. "Prince George has been remarkably composed, though I suspect he's holding back more than he lets on. Princess Charlotte asked this morning if she might wear her great-grandmother's pearl bracelet, the one Queen Mother Isabel gave her last Christmas. And Prince Louis." Lady Margaret paused, choosing her words carefully. "He's been asking when Great-Granny will come back from her long sleep." Catherine felt her throat tighten. She had tried to explain death to Louis in terms a child could understand, but the concept remained elusive for someone so young. The fact that he still expected Queen Mother Isabel to return made her heart ache in ways she hadn't anticipated. They stopped before the heavy oak door of the family sitting room. Catherine could hear muffled voices from within, George's deeper tones mixing with Charlotte's clearer soprano and Louis's higher pitch. Taking another steadying breath, she opened the door. The sight that greeted her nearly brought tears to her eyes. George stood near the window in his formal black suit, looking far older than his 15 years. The morning light caught the auburn highlights in his hair, so like his father's, and his green eyes held a seriousness that reminded her painfully of William during difficult moments. Charlotte sat on the blue velvet sofa, her dark hair braided back elegantly, wearing a black dress with white pearl buttons that had belonged to her great-grandmother as a young woman. The pearl bracelet gleamed softly on her wrist. Louis perched on the edge of an armchair, his legs swinging nervously. His black suit was immaculate, but his usually unruly brown curls had been tamed for the occasion, making him look both adorable and heartbreakingly formal. In his small hands, he clutched a photograph of himself and Queen Mother Isabel from the previous summer, both of them laughing as she pushed him on the tire swing that hung from the ancient oak in the palace gardens. "Mummy!" Louis jumped up the moment he saw her, still holding the photograph carefully. "Look, I brought Great-Granny's picture, so she won't be lonely." Catherine knelt down to his level, her heart breaking at his innocent logic. "That's very thoughtful of you, darling. I think she would love that you remember the happy times you shared together." George approached them with measured steps, his young face set in lines of determination. "Mother, I've been thinking about what Father said regarding our duty today. I want to make sure Charlotte and Louis understand what will happen at the cathedral." The pride Catherine felt for her eldest son's maturity warred with sadness that he felt compelled to shoulder such responsibility. That's very considerate, George. But remember, you're not carrying this burden alone. We're all here to support each other. Charlotte rose from the sofa and moved to stand beside her brothers. I've been thinking about the speech Great-Granny gave last year on her birthday, she said quietly. She talked about how the royal family serves the people and how even in sadness, we show them that life continues with hope. I think today is one of those times she meant. The wisdom in her daughter's words struck Catherine deeply. At 13, Charlotte already understood concepts that many adults struggled with. The weight of royal duty had begun to settle on her young shoulders, but she wore it with a grace that reminded Catherine of Queen Mother Isabel herself. "You're absolutely right, Charlotte," Catherine said, rising to her feet and gathering all three children in a gentle embrace. "Great-Granny would be so proud of how thoughtful and brave you're all being. Today will be difficult, but we'll face it together as a family." A discreet cough from the doorway announced the arrival of Sir Edmund Blackwood, the family's private secretary. His usually composed demeanor held just a hint of the strain they were all feeling. "Your Royal Highness, forgive the interruption, but His Royal Highness Prince William has returned from his meetings. The procession will begin in 45 minutes. Catherine nodded, feeling the familiar flutter of nerves that preceded any major royal engagement. But today felt different, heavier with meaning and fraught with emotion that couldn't be compartmentalized or set aside for the sake of duty. "Children, shall we go to the blue drawing room to wait for Papa?" she suggested, straightening Louis's tie and smoothing Charlotte's already perfect hair. George needed no such attention. He had learned early to present himself impeccably without prompting. As they walked through the palace corridors, Catherine noticed how the staff they passed offered subtle bows and respectful nods, their faces reflecting the same mixture of grief and admiration she felt. Queen Mother Isabel had been beloved not just by the royal family, but by every person who served in the palace. Stories abounded of her kindness, remembering birthdays, asking about grandchildren, ensuring that the hardest-working staff members received recognition and support. The blue drawing room, with its silk-covered walls and magnificent chandelier, felt different today. The usual warmth that characterized family gatherings had been replaced by a solemn formality. Fresh white lilies, Queen Mother Isabel's favorite flowers, filled every vase, their sweet fragrance a poignant reminder of the woman they were gathered to honor. Prince William entered the room moments later, his tall frame imposing in his formal military dress uniform. The medals and decorations caught the light from the chandelier, but Catherine could see the grief in his blue eyes that mirrored her own. He had loved his grandmother deeply, and her passing had affected him more than he would ever publicly acknowledge. "Papa." Louis ran to his father immediately, still clutching his photograph. "I brought Great-Granny's picture for the big church." William knelt down and pulled his youngest son close, his composure wavering slightly as he looked at the image of his grandmother's laughing face. "That's perfect, Louis. She would love to be with us today, even if it's just in the photograph." George and Charlotte approached more slowly, their own composure matching their father's formal demeanor. William embraced each of them in turn, and Catherine could see him drawing strength from their presence, even as he provided comfort and stability for them. "How are the preparations proceeding?" Catherine asked quietly, moving to stand beside her husband. "Everything is ready," William replied, his voice steady despite the emotion Catherine could detect beneath the surface. "The Archbishop will conduct the service, and representatives from 23 nations will be in attendance. The people have been gathering outside Westminster Cathedral since dawn. Through the tall windows, they could see the crowds beginning to line the streets that the funeral procession would travel. Black umbrellas bloomed like flowers against the gray morning, and the sea of faces turned toward the palace gates spoke of a nation preparing to bid farewell to its beloved Queen Mother. "Will there be many people, Papa?" Charlotte asked, her voice holding just a hint of nervousness. "Yes, darling," William answered honestly. Great-Granny was loved by millions of people, and they all want to say goodbye. But remember what she always told you about serving the people. We represent hope and continuity for them, especially during difficult times. Catherine watched her children process this information, seeing the weight of understanding settle over them. This would be far from their first public appearance, but it would be their first time navigating the complex emotions of public grief while managing their own private sorrow. Lady Margaret appeared in the doorway again, her timing as impeccable as always. "Your Royal Highnesses, the cars are ready. The procession will begin in 15 minutes." The final moments before leaving felt suspended in time. Catherine gathered her black clutch and checked her appearance one last time in the ornate mirror near the door. The children stood together, their formal clothing a stark reminder of the solemnity of the occasion. George straightened his shoulders and offered his arm to Charlotte with old-fashioned courtesy, while Louis stayed close to Catherine's side, his photograph held carefully in both hands. As they walked toward the palace entrance where the cars waited, Catherine felt the weight of history pressing around them. These same corridors had witnessed generations of royal farewells, and the portraits of long-dead monarchs seemed to watch their procession with understanding eyes. Today would add another chapter to the long story of the royal family, another moment when personal grief intersected with public duty. The great doors opened to reveal a gray London morning and the waiting vehicles. The sound of distant crowds drifted through the air, mixing with the tolling of church bells across the city. Catherine took a deep breath, feeling the cool air fill her lungs and center her for the challenges ahead. As they settled into the first car, Louis carefully placing his photograph on his lap, where he could see it, Catherine reflected on the conversation she and William had had about this day. They had known it would come eventually, but the reality felt more overwhelming than any preparation could have anticipated. Queen Mother Isabel had been the family's anchor, the wise voice that had guided them through scandals and celebrations alike. The car pulled away from the palace, beginning the slow journey through London streets toward Westminster Cathedral. Through the windows, Catherine could see the thousands of people who had come to pay their respects. Children held small British flags, elderly men and women clutched photographs of Queen Mother Isabel from her younger days, and families stood together in quiet solidarity. "Look at all the people," Charlotte whispered, her voice filled with wonder rather than nervousness now. "They loved her as much as we did," George observed, his mature perspective once again surprising Catherine with its depth. Louis pressed his face to the window, watching the crowds with wide eyes. "Are they sad like us, Mummy?" "Yes, darling," Catherine answered gently. "But they're also here to celebrate Great-Granny's life and all the good things she did for our country. Sometimes when we're very sad, being together with other people helps us feel better." The cathedral came into view ahead of them, its ancient spires reaching toward the gray sky like prayers made of stone. The Gothic architecture had witnessed centuries of royal ceremonies, but today it would serve as the setting for a farewell that would mark the end of an era and the beginning of a new chapter for the royal family. As their car joined the formal procession approaching the cathedral steps, Catherine felt a mixture of grief and determination settle over her. Today would test them all in ways they had never experienced before, but they would face it together, drawing strength from each other and from the love that Queen Mother Isabel had instilled in all of them. The crowds fell silent as the royal cars approached, the only sounds the soft purr of engines and the distant tolling of bells. Soon they would step out into the full gaze of the world, carrying their private grief into the public sphere where it would become part of history. But for these last few moments in the car, they remained simply a family preparing to say goodbye to someone they had loved deeply and who had loved them in return. The ancient stones of Westminster Cathedral seemed to absorb the silence that fell over London as the royal family's cars drew to a stop before the great steps. Catherine felt her heart rate quicken as she looked up at the towering Gothic facade, its intricate carvings and soaring arches a testament to centuries of faith and tradition. Today, this sacred space would witness one of the most significant farewells in the kingdom's recent history. The car door opened, and the soft murmur of the waiting crowd reached her ears. Hundreds of photographers and television cameras were positioned at respectful distances, ready to capture every moment of this historic day. Catherine stepped out first, her black heels clicking softly against the stone pavement, followed by the children. William emerged from the second car, his military uniform catching the filtered sunlight that broke briefly through the gray clouds. Louis still clutched his photograph of Queen Mother Isabel, his small knuckles white with the effort of holding it steady. Charlotte walked between her brothers with perfect posture, the pearl bracelet glinting softly on her wrist. George moved with the measured steps he had been practicing, his young face set in lines of solemn concentration. The Archbishop of Canterbury, resplendent in his ceremonial robes, waited at the top of the cathedral steps. His weathered face reflected the gravity of the occasion, but his eyes held the warmth and compassion that had made him beloved by the royal family. He had officiated at George's christening, Charlotte's confirmation preparation, and countless family celebrations over the years. Today, he would guide them through their most difficult goodbye. "Your Royal Highnesses," the Archbishop said softly as they approached, his voice barely audible above the whisper of wind through the ancient stones. "The service will begin in 10 minutes. The Queen Mother rests in the Lady Chapel, if you would like a private moment before the ceremony begins." Catherine nodded gratefully. The opportunity for a final private farewell felt like a precious gift in a day that would be otherwise consumed by public ritual and ceremony. She looked to William, who squeezed her hand gently before nodding to the Archbishop. They walked through the cathedral's massive doors into the hushed interior. The space felt both magnificent and intimate, with golden light filtering through stained glass windows that had witnessed centuries of royal celebrations and sorrows. The scent of white lilies and burning candles created an atmosphere of peaceful reverence. The Lady Chapel, smaller and more intimate than the main cathedral space, had been transformed into a bower of white flowers. Queen Mother Isabel's casket rested on a raised platform, draped with the royal standard and crowned with a simple spray of white roses, her favorite flower from her own garden at Thornfield Palace. 4 honor guards stood at the corners, their stillness so complete they seemed like statues carved from stone. Louis tugged at Catherine's hand as they approached. "Mummy," he whispered, his voice barely audible in the sacred space, "why is Great-Granny sleeping in that box?" Catherine knelt beside him, her heart clenching at his innocent confusion. "Remember how we talked about Great-Granny going to sleep forever? Her body is resting now, but her spirit, all the love she gave us and the happy memories we have, that lives on in our hearts. But I want to show her my picture," Louis said, holding up the photograph with trembling hands. Charlotte moved to stand beside her younger brother, placing a gentle hand on his shoulder. "Great-Granny can see it, Louis. She's watching over us, just like she always did. And she knows how much you loved her." George joined them, creating a protective circle around Louis. "Charlotte's right. Great-Granny always said that love never dies, it just changes form. She's still with us, just in a different way." Catherine felt tears prick her eyes at the wisdom and compassion her children showed. They stood together in the golden light of the chapel, each lost in their own memories and private farewells. The silence stretched around them, broken only by the distant sound of organ music beginning to filter from the main cathedral. William placed his hand on Catherine's shoulder. "It's time," he said gently. They made their way back to the main cathedral, which had filled with hundreds of dignitaries, family members, and friends. The front pews had been reserved for the immediate royal family, with other relatives and close friends filling the rows behind them. Catherine recognized faces from across Europe, royal cousins, presidents, and prime ministers who had traveled to pay their respects to a woman who had touched countless lives. As they took their places in the front pew, Catherine noticed how the children positioned themselves with instinctive care. George sat at the end, nearest the aisle, ready to help if either of his younger siblings needed support. Charlotte sat between George and Louis, her presence a calming influence on her youngest brother. Louis sat beside Catherine, his photograph carefully placed on his lap, where he could see Queen Mother Isabel's smiling face. The great organ began to play, its deep notes reverberating through the ancient stones and filling every corner of the vast space. The processional hymn was one that Queen Mother Isabel had specifically requested, "Love Divine, all loves excelling," a testament to her deep faith and her belief in the power of love to transcend even death. The Archbishop took his place at the altar, his voice carrying clearly through the cathedral as he began the opening prayers. His words spoke of life well lived, of service freely given, and of love that endures beyond the boundaries of mortal existence. Catherine found comfort in the familiar rhythms of the service, the ancient words that had comforted generations of mourners before them. When it came time for the readings, Princess and Queen Mother Isabel's only daughter rose to deliver the first lesson. Her voice was steady and clear as she read from Ecclesiastes, the passage about seasons and times that spoke to the cyclical nature of life and death. The words seemed to echo with special meaning in this ancient space where so many royal lives have been celebrated and mourned. Prince Charles, William's father, and the current king delivered the second reading from Corinthians about love being patient and kind, never ending. His voice carried the weight of a son's grief, but also the strength that came from years of public service and personal faith. Catherine could see William straightening in his seat, drawing strength from his father's composure. The eulogy was delivered by Lord Chancellor Thompson, who had served as Queen Mother Isabel's private secretary for over 30 years. His words painted a picture of a woman who had been both regal and remarkably human, someone who remembered the names of the palace gardener's grandchildren and who never missed sending birthday cards to the children of her staff. He spoke of her quick wit, her love of crossword puzzles, and her ability to find humor even in the most formal state occasions. Queen Mother Isabel often said that royalty was not about titles or ceremony, but about service, Lord Thompson said, his voice carrying to every corner of the cathedral. She believed that every interaction, no matter how brief, was an opportunity to bring a moment of joy or comfort into someone else's life. She lived that philosophy every day, and in doing so, she showed us all what it truly means to be noble. As the Lord Chancellor spoke, Catherine watched her children's reactions. George listened with the intense focus he brought to everything important, occasionally nodding as if filing away lessons for his own future. Charlotte's eyes never left the speaker's face, absorbing every word with the emotional intelligence that had always set her apart. Louis fidgeted slightly, but remained attentive, occasionally looking down at his photograph as if sharing the stories with Queen Mother Isabel herself. The service continued with hymns that had been Queen Mother Isabel's favorites, their melodies familiar from years of family celebrations and private worship services at the palace chapel. Catherine found herself remembering Sunday mornings when Queen Mother Isabel would gather the children around the old piano in the morning room, teaching them the words to traditional hymns and folk songs that had been passed down through generations. When it came time for the final prayers, the Archbishop's voice took on a note of hope that transcended the grief permeating the cathedral. He spoke of resurrection and eternal life, of love that conquers death, and of the ways that good deeds and kind words echo through eternity. His words seemed to wrap around the congregation like a blanket, offering comfort without minimizing the reality of their loss. As the service drew to its close, the great organ began the recessional hymn, "How Great Thou Art," a hymn that Queen Mother Isabel had loved for its celebration of creation and divine love. The congregation rose as one, their voices joining together in a chorus that seemed to lift the very stones of the cathedral. The honor guard moved with military precision to bear the casket from the chapel. William and Charles joined them, along with Prince Harry and other male relatives, their faces set in lines of determined composure as they performed this final act of service for the woman who had shaped their lives in countless ways. Catherine watched as her husband took his position, his military bearing evident in every movement. She felt a surge of pride in his strength, even as her heart ached for the burden he carried. Behind them, the congregation filed out slowly, each person taking time to pay their silent respects as the royal standard passed by. Outside the cathedral, the crowds had swelled to thousands. The funeral procession would make its way through London's historic streets, past Buckingham Palace, and through Hyde Park, before continuing to Windsor Castle for the private burial ceremony. Catherine knew that millions more were watching on television around the world, sharing in this moment of collective farewell. As they prepared to enter the cars for the procession, Louis looked up at Catherine with eyes that seemed older than his 11 years. "Mummy, when we go to Windsor, will great-granny be able to see her rose garden from where she'll sleep?" Catherine felt her composure waver for just a moment before she found her voice. "Yes, darling. She'll be right near the garden where she taught you to plant seeds last spring. And every time those roses bloom, we'll remember how much she loved watching things grow." The procession began slowly, the cars moving at walking pace to allow the crowds lining the streets to pay their respects. Through the windows, Catherine could see people of all ages. Elderly men who removed their hats as the cortege passed, young mothers holding children who waved small flags, teenagers who stood with their hands over their hearts in gestures of respect that seemed instinctive rather than taught. "Look how many people came," Charlotte observed softly, her voice filled with wonder rather than nervousness. "Great-granny would be amazed," George said, though his voice suggested he wasn't entirely surprised by the outpouring of affection. As they passed Buckingham Palace, Catherine saw crowds gathered around the gates where people had left flowers, photographs, and handwritten notes. The spontaneous memorial had grown throughout the week since Queen Mother Isabel's passing, becoming a testament to the personal connection she had forged with people she had never met but had touched through her decades of public service. The journey to Windsor Castle took nearly 2 hours, winding through London's crowded streets and out into the countryside where autumn colors painted the landscape in shades of gold and amber. The castle appeared ahead of them, its ancient towers rising against the gray sky like something from a fairy tale, its walls holding centuries of royal history within their embrace. At Windsor, the public ceremony would give way to private family burial in the small chapel where Queen Mother Isabel would rest beside her beloved husband, surrounded by generations of royal ancestors. But first, there would be time for the immediate family to gather once more to share stories and memories away from the cameras and crowds. As their car approached the castle gates, Catherine felt a mixture of exhaustion and relief. The public portion of this difficult day was nearly over, and soon they would be able to grieve as a family without the weight of ceremony and protocol. The children had been remarkable in their composure and dignity, but she could see the strain beginning to show in their quiet faces and careful movements. The setting sun broke through the clouds as they entered Windsor's ancient courtyard, casting long shadows across the cobblestones and bathing the castle walls in golden light. It seemed like a benediction, a gentle reminder that even in the midst of grief, beauty and hope could still break through the darkness. Tomorrow would bring new challenges and responsibilities, but tonight they would remember and celebrate a life that had touched them all in profound and lasting ways. The ancient walls of Windsor Castle seemed to embrace the royal family as they gathered in Queen Mother Isabel's private apartments for the final hours before the burial ceremony. These rooms, with their chintz-covered furniture and walls lined with family photographs, had been her sanctuary for the past 20 years. The afternoon light filtering through the mullioned windows cast gentle shadows across the space that still held traces of her lavender perfume and the faint scent of the Earl Grey tea she had loved. Catherine settled into the familiar armchair where Queen Mother Isabel had always sat for afternoon tea, feeling the weight of memory in every carefully preserved detail. The children moved through the rooms with reverent curiosity, touching objects they had seen countless times but which now carried new significance. Louis gravitated immediately to the chess set by the window, running his small fingers over the pieces that he and his great-grandmother had moved in their weekly games. "She let me win sometimes," Louis said quietly, his voice carrying a mixture of sadness and affection. "But she always made me work for it first. She said that victories that come too easy don't feel as good." Charlotte discovered Queen Mother Isabel's collection of music boxes on the writing desk, each one a treasure from travels around the world. She wound up a small silver one shaped like a swan, and the delicate melody of Fur Elise filled the quiet room. "She taught me to play this on the piano," Charlotte said, her voice catching slightly. "She said Beethoven wrote it for someone he loved, and that every time we play it, we're sharing that love with the world." George stood before the wall of photographs that chronicled decades of royal life. Images of Queen Mother Isabel as a young bride, as a mother with small children, as a grandmother surrounded by multiple generations, and as a great-grandmother delighting in the newest additions to the family. His eyes stopped on a recent photograph from Louis's last birthday party, where Queen Mother Isabel sat in the garden wearing a paper crown that Louis had made for her face bright with laughter. "She was never too dignified to wear a paper crown," George observed, a small smile crossing his face for the first time that day. Even when the photographers were there, she wore it through the entire party because Louis had made it specially for her. William entered the room carrying a leather-bound photo album that Catherine recognized as one of Queen Mother Isabel's treasured memory books. "I thought you might like to look through this," he said, settling onto the sofa and opening it to reveal pages of informal family photographs that had never been seen by the public. The children gathered around their father as he turned the pages slowly. There were pictures of picnics in the Scottish Highlands, Christmas mornings at Sandringham, summer afternoons in the Windsor Rose Garden, and countless quiet moments that captured the private family behind the public faces. Queen Mother Isabel appeared in most of the images, often in the background, always watching her family with eyes that sparkled with love and gentle amusement. "Look, there's the time she taught us to make fairy houses in the garden," Charlotte said, pointing to a photograph of herself at age 7, carefully arranging twigs and flowers while Queen Mother Isabel knelt beside her in the dirt, her pearls slightly askew and her hands muddy from gardening. "And here's when she helped me build the treehouse," George added, finding an image of Queen Mother Isabel holding a hammer with determined concentration while 13-year-old George steadied a board above her head. As they turned the pages, stories emerged with each photograph. Queen Mother Isabel teaching Louis to feed the swans on the castle lake, her skirt held carefully away from the water while she showed him how to break the bread into pieces small enough for the signets. Queen Mother Isabel and Charlotte baking scones in the palace kitchen at 3 in the morning because Charlotte couldn't sleep and had mentioned being hungry. Queen Mother Isabel reading bedtime stories to all 3 children piled together in the big bed in the guest room during a thunderstorm that had knocked out the electricity. "She never said no to an adventure," Catherine mused, remembering her own experiences with Queen Mother Isabel's spontaneous enthusiasms. Last spring, when Louis wanted to camp in the garden, she insisted on joining him. "I found them at midnight roasting marshmallows over a tiny camping stove and telling ghost stories. She said the best ghost stories are the ones about friendly ghosts who help people," Louis piped up, his eyes brightening at the memory. "She told me that all the kings and queens who live in the castle before were friendly ghosts who watched over the family." Lady Margaret appeared in the doorway with a tea service, moving with the quiet efficiency that had characterized her decades of royal service. But today, her usual formal composure was softened by grief, and Catherine could see tears threatening in her gray eyes as she arranged the familiar blue and white china that Queen Mother Isabel had used for informal family gatherings. "Lady Margaret," Catherine said gently, "please sit with us. You are part of this family, too." The older woman's composure wavered for a moment before she accepted the invitation, settling carefully into Queen Mother Isabel's favorite chair. 30 years I worked for Her Royal Highness," she said quietly. Never a crossword, never a moment when she didn't ask about my grandchildren or remember some small detail about my life. She sent flowers when my husband passed, and She called personally to check on me during my surgery last year. The afternoon drifted by in waves of storytelling and comfortable silence. Prince Charles joined them briefly, sharing memories of his mother's unwavering support during the difficult early years of his reign. Princess Anne arrived with her own collection of photographs, including several that showed Queen Mother Isabel's mischievous sense of humor. Images of her hiding behind curtains during formal portraits to make the children laugh, or wearing sunglasses indoors because she had forgotten to remove them after a garden party. As the sun began to sink lower in the sky, Archbishop Thompson arrived to escort them to the private burial service in St. George's Chapel. The family members who had gathered throughout the afternoon, cousins, aunts, uncles, and close family friends, began to make their way toward the ancient chapel where generations of royal ancestors rested in peaceful dignity. The chapel, smaller and more intimate than Westminster Cathedral, felt like stepping into a jewel box. The late afternoon light filtered through stained glass windows that painted rainbow patterns across the stone floor, and the altar was adorned with white roses from Queen Mother Isabel's own garden. Only 50 people filled the wooden pews, creating an atmosphere of family intimacy that had been impossible during the morning's public ceremony. Catherine took her place in the front pew with the children, feeling the weight of history in the stones beneath her feet. This chapel had witnessed royal christenings, weddings, and burials for centuries, its walls holding the echoes of countless prayers and tears. Today, it would receive Queen Mother Isabel into the company of the royal ancestors who had preceded her. The service was brief and deeply personal, with readings chosen by family members and hymns that had been sung at family celebrations for generations. Prince Harry read from the book of Ecclesiasticus, his voice steady as he spoke words about wisdom and understanding that seemed perfectly suited to honor his grandmother's memory. Charlotte surprised everyone by asking to read a poem she had written herself, her clear voice carrying throughout the chapel as she spoke of love that transcends death and memories that shine like stars in the darkness. When it came time for the final prayers, the Archbishop's words were simple and heartfelt, speaking of a life lived in service to others and of the peace that comes to those who have loved well and deeply. The honor guard, composed of soldiers who had served Queen Mother Isabel personally over the years, performed their final duty with tears streaming down their weathered faces. As the casket was lowered into the vault beneath the chapel floor, Louis stepped forward and placed his photograph of himself and Queen Mother Isabel on the stone marker. "So she won't be lonely," he whispered, his words carrying clearly in the hushed chapel. The gesture seemed to break the careful composure that had carried them all through the day. Catherine felt tears finally fall freely down her cheeks as she watched her youngest son's simple act of love. Around her, she could hear quiet sobs from family members who had held their grief in check throughout the long day of public ceremony. But even in their tears, there was something peaceful about this final goodbye. Queen Mother Isabel rested now in the place she had chosen, surrounded by ancestors and family, in the chapel where she had worshipped for decades and where her own great-great-grandmother Queen Victoria had found solace in her own times of loss. As they left the chapel, the last rays of sunlight painted the castle walls in shades of gold and amber. The children walked close together, their formal clothes now slightly rumpled after the long day, their composure finally relaxing into the natural expressions of young people who had carried an enormous burden with grace and dignity. "She would be proud of you all," William said as they made their way back toward the castle's main apartments where a private dinner awaited. "The way you conducted yourselves today, the respect you showed, the love you demonstrated, she would be so proud." "I think she was watching," Charlotte said quietly, looking up at the first stars beginning to appear in the darkening sky. "During the service, I kept feeling like she was there, making sure we were all right." "She was," George agreed, his voice carrying new authority that spoke of lessons learned and responsibilities accepted. "And she always will be. Today we said goodbye to her body, but the love and wisdom she gave us, that's ours forever." As they entered the warm light of the castle, Catherine felt a complex mixture of sadness and gratitude settling over her. The day had been everything they had feared and more than they had hoped, a fitting tribute to a woman who had touched countless lives with her grace, wisdom, and unwavering love. The children had risen to meet challenges that would have tested adults, showing maturity and compassion that spoke well for their future roles. Tomorrow would bring the return to normal routines, the resumption of royal duties, and the gradual process of learning to navigate their roles without Queen Mother Isabel's steady guidance. But tonight, they would gather as a family to share a quiet dinner, to tell more stories, and to begin the long journey of carrying her memory forward into whatever the future might hold. The loss would always be with them, but so would the love, the laughter, and the countless lessons she had taught them about what it truly meant to serve with grace, to lead with humility, and to find joy in the simple moments that make up a life well lived. In learning to say goodbye, they had also learned how to carry her spirit with them always, and in that carrying forward, Queen Mother Isabel would continue to shape their lives and touch the world through their actions. 3 weeks after Queen Mother Isabel's funeral, life at Thornfield Palace had begun to settle into new rhythms, though her absence echoed through every corridor and room. Catherine found herself pausing outside the Queen Mother's former apartments each morning during her walk to the children's wing, half expecting to hear the familiar sound of classical music drifting from within or to catch a glimpse of the woman who had been the family's emotional anchor for so many years. The children had returned to their studies with remarkable resilience, though each carried their grief in different ways. George threw himself into his academic work with renewed intensity, as if excellence in his lessons could somehow honor his great-grandmother's memory. Charlotte spent hours in the music room, playing the piano pieces Queen Mother Isabel had taught her, finding comfort in melodies that connected her to precious shared moments. Louis had taken to carrying a small notebook everywhere, writing letters to his great-grandmother that he would never send but which seemed to help him process his feelings about her absence. On this particular morning, Catherine stood in Queen Mother Isabel's former sitting room, now being carefully cataloged by the palace staff. Every book, every photograph, every piece of furniture would need to be sorted, some items go to family members, others to be preserved in the royal archives, and still others to be donated to the charities Queen Mother Isabel had supported throughout her life. Lady Margaret worked systematically through the writing desk, her movements careful and reverent as she handled each item. "Your Royal Highness," she said softly, looking up as Catherine entered the room, "I've found something I think the children should see." She held out a wooden box, its surface worn smooth by years of handling. Catherine recognized it immediately. Queen Mother Isabel's memory box, where she had kept treasures from her grandchildren and great-grandchildren over the years. Catherine had seen her add items to it countless times. Drawings from art lessons, pressed flowers from garden walks, small stones collected during beach holidays, and photographs that captured spontaneous moments of joy. "She asked me to make sure the children received this when they were ready," Lady Margaret continued, her voice thick with emotion. "She said they would know when that time had come." Catherine accepted the box with hands that trembled slightly. The weight of it spoke of years of collected memories, small treasures that had meant enough to Queen Mother Isabel to save and preserve. Opening it felt like an intrusion. Yet Catherine knew that these memories belonged to the children now, part of their inheritance from a woman who had loved them unconditionally. The lid opened to reveal layers of carefully organized mementos, each wrapped in tissue paper and labeled in Queen Mother Isabel's distinctive handwriting. There were the drawings George had made as a small boy, showing stick figures of the royal family with crowns drawn in bright yellow crayon. Charlotte's first attempts at poetry, written in careful cursive on palace stationery. Louis's collection of interesting rocks from various royal estates, each one carefully labeled with the date and location where he had found it. But beneath these treasures lay something unexpected. 3 sealed envelopes, each bearing one of the children's names in Queen Mother Isabel's elegant script. Catherine held them carefully, understanding that these final gifts were meant for the children alone, messages from beyond that would provide comfort and guidance in whatever challenges lay ahead. She found the children in the schoolroom where they worked on their morning lessons with their tutors. George was bent over a history text, taking detailed notes about parliamentary procedure, while Charlotte worked on a French translation and Louis practiced his arithmetic with intense concentration. The sight of them studying so diligently filled Catherine with pride, though she also felt the absence of the woman who had taken such delight in their academic achievements. "Children," Catherine said softly, not wanting to interrupt their concentration, "I have something special to show you. Something from Great-Granny." The three young faces turned toward her immediately, their expressions shifting from curiosity to wonder as she placed the wooden memory box on the table between them. Louis reached out to touch it gently, his eyes wide with recognition. "That's Great-Granny's treasure box," he said in an odd whisper. "She showed it to me once when I asked about all the pictures on her desk. She said she kept the most important things in the whole world inside it." Catherine opened the box slowly, revealing the carefully preserved collection of their childhood artifacts. The children leaned forward, their faces lighting up as they recognized their own handiwork from years past. George picked up one of his early drawings, shaking his head in embarrassment at his younger self's artistic efforts. "I remember making this," he said, holding up a picture of the family at Christmas, complete with a Christmas tree that appeared to be taller than the palace itself. "I was so proud of it. I thought I was the greatest artist in the world." She kept everything, Charlotte marveled, unwrapping a small clay sculpture she had made during a pottery lesson when she was 8 years old. The little horse was lopsided and missing part of its tail, but Queen Mother Isabel had preserved it as if it were a masterpiece created by Michelangelo himself. Louis discovered his rock collection, each stone still bearing his careful labels written in his developing handwriting. "Look, here's the one from Scotland that looks like a heart," he said, holding up a smooth pebble that did indeed bear a resemblance to the shape of a heart. "Great-Granny said it was special because I found it on her birthday." As wonderful as these rediscovered treasures were, Catherine's attention remained on the 3 envelopes at the bottom of the box. She lifted them carefully, noting how Queen Mother Isabel had written each child's name with particular care, as if the act of writing their names had been a blessing in itself. "There's more," Catherine said gently. "She left each of you a personal letter." The silence that followed was profound. The children stared at the envelopes as if they contained magic, which in many ways they did. The magic of final word from someone who had loved them completely and understood them deeply. George accepted his envelope with the solemnity he brought to all important moments. Charlotte took hers with hands that trembled slightly, while Louis looked at his letter with a mixture of excitement and uncertainty that was completely characteristic of his 11-year-old perspective on the world. "Should we read them together?" Charlotte asked, her voice soft with emotion. Catherine nodded, settling into a chair beside them as each child carefully opened their envelope. The rustle of paper seemed unnaturally loud in the quiet schoolroom as they unfolded letters written in Queen Mother Isabel's familiar handwriting. George read his letter silently first, his expression moving through surprise, sadness, and, finally, a kind of peaceful resolve. Charlotte's eyes filled with tears as she read, but they were the kind of tears that came from joy rather than sorrow. Louis read more slowly, occasionally moving his lips as he worked through words that challenged his reading level, but his face glowed with happiness as he absorbed his great-grandmother's final message to him. "What did she say?" Catherine asked gently, respecting their privacy, but hoping they might choose to share these final gifts. George cleared his throat, his young voice taking on the formal tone he used when discussing serious matters. "She wrote about responsibility and leadership. She said that being royal isn't about privilege, it's about service, and that the crown I'll wear someday will be heavy not because of its gold and jewels, but because of the weight of caring for other people. She reminded me that every decision I make should be guided by the question, how will this help someone who is less than I do?" Charlotte wiped away a tear before speaking. She wrote about kindness and creativity. She said that my music and my poetry are gifts that can bring beauty into other people's lives, and that I should never be afraid to show my emotions because feelings are what connect us to each other. She told me to always remember that being strong doesn't mean not crying. It means crying when you need to, and then getting up to help someone else who's crying too. Lewis looked up from his letter with shining eyes. She said, I'm going to grow up to be a wonderful man because I notice things that other people miss, like sad dogs and pretty rocks and when people need hugs. She said my job is to help people remember to notice beautiful things and to laugh even when they're worried. And she said she'll be watching me play chess from wherever she is now. And she's proud of how much better I've gotten at thinking ahead. Catherine felt her own tears threatening as she listened to these final messages. Queen Mother Isabel had understood each child so completely, recognizing their individual gifts and challenges, offering guidance that was perfectly tailored to their personalities and future roles. Even in death, she continued to nurture and guide them with the wisdom that had made her beloved by everyone who knew her. She saw who you really are, Catherine said softly, and she believed in who you were going to become. That's the most precious gift anyone can give. The afternoon passed quietly as the children explored more treasures from the memory box and shared stories prompted by the rediscovered artifacts. George found a program from school play where he had forgotten his lines and improvised an entirely different speech, making the audience laugh while his family cheered from the front row. Charlotte discovered pressed flowers from the garden parties where Queen Mother Isabel had taught her to make flower crowns for the younger guests. Lewis found photographs of himself and Queen Mother Isabel feeding ducks at various royal estates, documenting years of shared adventures in search of interesting wildlife. As evening approached, Catherine suggested they create their own additions to the memory box, new treasures that would represent this day and their continuing connection to Queen Mother Isabel's memory. George wrote a letter of his own, promising to live up to the expectations she had expressed and to honor her memory through service to others. Charlotte composed a short poem about love that transcends death and lives on in the hearts of those left behind. Lewis drew a picture of Queen Mother Isabel sitting in a garden surrounded by angels who looked suspiciously like the palace cats and dogs she had adored. They placed these new additions in the memory box alongside the treasures Queen Mother Isabel had saved, creating a bridge between past and future that would allow her presence to remain part of their ongoing story. The box would live in the family's private sitting room, where future grandchildren and great-grandchildren could discover their own family history and understand the love that had shaped generations of royal children. That evening, as Catherine tucked Lewis in a bed, he looked up at her with the serious expression he wore when wrestling with profound thoughts. "Mummy," he said, "do you think Great-Granny knows we found her letters today?" Catherine smoothed his hair back from his forehead, considering how to answer a question that touched on mysteries no one could fully understand. "I think love like Great-Granny's doesn't just disappear when someone dies," she said finally. "I think it finds ways to keep reaching us, like sunlight that keeps warming us even when clouds cover the sky. So yes, I think she knows, and I think she's happy that we still feel her love." Lewis nodded solemnly, as if this explanation made perfect sense to him. "Then, I'll keep writing her letters in my notebook, so she'll know about all the interesting things that happen. That way she won't miss any of the good parts." As Catherine turned off the lights and made her way to her own room, she reflected on the day's discoveries and the way grief continued to evolve and change shape. The sharp pain of loss was gradually transforming into something else. Not the absence of Queen Mother Isabel, but her presence in different form, woven into memory and carried forward in the values and love she had instilled in all of them. The letters had been gifts beyond measure, but perhaps the greatest gift was the realization that love truly does transcend death, living on in the hearts and actions of those who carry its influence into the future. Queen Mother Isabel's wisdom would guide the children through challenges yet to come, and her love would remain a constant source of strength and comfort throughout their lives. 6 months had passed since Queen Mother Isabel's funeral, and spring had returned to the gardens of Thornfield Palace with an abundance that seemed to celebrate her memory. Catherine stood at the window of the morning room, watching the children work alongside the palace gardeners in the rose garden that had been Queen Mother Isabel's pride and joy. Today marked a special occasion, the dedication of the memorial garden that would honor her legacy and serve as a place of reflection for future generations. The transformation had been remarkable to witness. What had once been Queen Mother Isabel's private rose garden had been expanded and redesigned to include walking paths, meditation benches, and educational displays about the various charitable causes she had supported throughout her life. The centerpiece was a beautiful bronze statue of Queen Mother Isabel reading to a child, surrounded by the white roses she had loved so dearly. George, now 16 and carrying himself with increasing confidence, directed the placement of the final rose bushes with the focused attention he brought to every responsibility. His growth over the past months had been remarkable, not just in height, though he now stood nearly as tall as his father, but in his understanding of what royal service truly meant. The lessons Queen Mother Isabel had shared in her letter had taken root, and Catherine often saw him pause to consider how his actions might affect others. Charlotte, at 14, had blossomed into a young woman whose sensitivity to others' emotions made her a natural diplomat. She moved among the gardeners with easy grace, remembering their names and asking about their families with genuine interest. The music lessons she had shared with Queen Mother Isabel had evolved into a deeper passion for the arts, and she now spent hours each week visiting hospitals and care facilities, bringing the gift of music to people who needed moments of beauty in their lives. Louis, approaching his 12th birthday, remained the family's heart, though his understanding of loss had deepened his natural empathy. His weekly letters to Queen Mother Isabel had evolved into a journal that he shared with his siblings, documenting family adventures and observations about the world around him. His ability to notice small details and find joy in simple moments continued to amaze everyone who spent time with him. The Memorial Garden Project had become a family endeavor, with each child contributing ideas and taking responsibility for different aspects of its creation. George had researched sustainable gardening practices and worked with the palace groundskeepers to ensure the garden would thrive for generations. Charlotte had collaborated with local musicians to create an audio guide that would accompany visitors on their walks through the space, featuring musical selections that had been meaningful to Queen Mother Isabel. Louis had insisted on including a section specifically designed for children, with interactive elements that would help young visitors understand the importance of kindness and service to others. Catherine made her way through the French doors and onto the terrace, breathing in the sweet fragrance of blooming roses mixed with the fresh scent of recently turned earth. The children looked up as she approached, their faces bright with the satisfaction that comes from meaningful work accomplished with love. "The head gardener says we're ready for tomorrow's dedication ceremony," George reported, brushing dirt from his hands with a practical efficiency that had become characteristic of his approach to every task. "The irrigation system is working perfectly, and all the plantings are established. Mrs. Patterson from the village school brought her class by this morning for a preview," Charlotte added, her eyes sparkling with delight. The children loved the story circles and the butterfly garden. One little girl said it felt like being inside a fairy tale. Louis bounced on his toes with excitement, still holding the small trowel he had been using to plant flower bulbs along the pathway. "And we found 3 new butterflies today. I wrote them down in my nature journal, just like Great-Granny taught me." She would be so excited about the painted ladies. She always said they were her favorites because they reminded her that beautiful things can come from the most ordinary caterpillars. Catherine felt her heart swell with pride at their enthusiasm and dedication. The memorial garden represented more than just a tribute to Queen Mother Isabel. It had become a vehicle for the children to express their love while developing their own sense of purpose and connection to the causes their great-grandmother had championed. "Your father will be here soon for the final walkthrough," Catherine said, settling onto one of the new benches that offered a perfect view of the Rose Arbor, where Queen Mother Isabel had held impromptu tea parties for visiting children. "Lord Chancellor Thompson and the Archbishop will arrive this afternoon to review the ceremony preparations." The dedication ceremony planned for the following day would be attended by representatives from the dozens of charities Queen Mother Isabel had supported, along with family members, palace staff, and local community leaders. But the true celebration had been happening for months as the garden took shape, bringing together people from all walks of life who had been touched by Queen Mother Isabel's kindness and wanted to contribute to her memorial. As they sat together in the afternoon sunshine, Catherine reflected on how profoundly the children had changed since that difficult day in Westminster Cathedral. They had not only survived their first major encounter with public grief, but had emerged stronger and more purposeful. The lessons Queen Mother Isabel had taught them about service and compassion had taken deeper root through the process of creating something beautiful in her honor. "I've been thinking about the speech I'll give tomorrow," George said, his voice taking on the thoughtful tone he used when working through complex ideas. "I want to talk about how Great-Granny taught us that kindness isn't just being nice to people, it's actively working to make their lives better. This garden isn't just about remembering her, it's about continuing the work she started." Charlotte nodded thoughtfully. "I've been practicing the song I'll perform during the ceremony. It's one she taught me, but I've arranged it for harp and voice because she always said music was most beautiful when it came from the heart rather than just following rules. And I get to welcome all the children who come to visit," Lewis added proudly. "Lady Margaret has been helping me practice my introduction speech. I want to make sure they know that this garden belongs to them too, not just to grown-ups with fancy titles." Prince William arrived as the afternoon light began to soften, approaching through the garden paths with a measured stride that characterized his public appearances, but relaxing visibly as he drew closer to his family. The past months had marked a period of adjustment for him as well, as he assumed many of the charitable patronages that Queen Mother Isabel had maintained, and worked to honor her legacy while developing his own approach to royal service. "This is remarkable," he said, surveying the completed garden with obvious emotion. "She would be absolutely delighted. Look how you've managed to capture her spirit in every detail." They walked together through the various sections of the memorial garden, William listening as each child explained their contributions and shared the thinking behind different design choices. The educational pavilion featured displays about Queen Mother Isabel's charitable work, but also included interactive elements that would help visitors understand how they could get involved in similar efforts in their own communities. "The most important thing Great-Granny taught us was that everyone can make a difference," Charlotte explained as they paused before a display about youth volunteer opportunities. "We wanted visitors to leave here feeling inspired to find their own ways to help people." The children's tea garden, complete with child-sized tables and chairs carved from sustainable wood, recreated the intimate atmosphere of Queen Mother Isabel's spontaneous entertaining. Lewis had insisted on including a small library of children's books, housed in a weatherproof case designed to look like a tree trunk, where young visitors could sit and read stories about kindness, courage, and making the world a better place. "She always said that big changes start with small actions," Lewis explained seriously. "So we made sure there are lots of small ways for people to start helping right here in the garden." As evening approached, the family gathered in the rose arbor for what had become their weekly tradition, sharing stories about Queen Mother Isabel and discussing how her lessons applied to the challenges they faced in their royal duties. These conversations had evolved into something deeper than mere reminiscence. They had become a way of keeping her wisdom alive and relevant to their changing lives. "I met with the youth council from the homeless shelter she supported," George reported. "They've been working on a project to create job training programs for young people aging out of foster care. Great-Granny would love that they're focusing on giving people tools to build their own futures rather than just temporary help." "The Children's Hospital invited me to help design a music therapy program," Charlotte added. "We're going to train teenage volunteers to work with younger patients, teaching them simple songs and helping them express their feelings through music. And I'm going to start a pen pal program between the village school and the children's ward at the hospital," Lewis announced proudly. "Mrs. Patterson thinks the students would love to write letters to children who can't go to regular school because they're sick. Great-Granny always said letters were like hugs you could send through the mail." Catherine listened to their plans with a mixture of pride and amazement. In processing their grief, the children had discovered their own capacity for meaningful service. Queen Mother Isabel's death had been devastating, but it had also awakened something powerful in each of them, a deep understanding that their privileges came with responsibilities and that true happiness came from using their advantages to help others. The dedication ceremony the following morning exceeded everyone's expectations. Hundreds of people gathered in the memorial garden, representing every aspect of Queen Mother Isabel's charitable work and personal relationships. There were nurses from hospitals she had visited, teachers from schools she had supported, elderly residents from care homes where she had spent countless hours, and children from youth organizations that had benefited from her patronage. George delivered his speech with confidence and sincerity, speaking about the difference between charity that comes from duty and kindness that flows from genuine love. Charlotte's musical performance brought tears to many eyes, her pure voice carrying across the garden like a blessing. Louis charmed everyone with his enthusiasm as he invited the visiting children to explore their special section of the garden and discover the books and activities that had been prepared for them. But perhaps the most moving moment came when Archbishop Thompson invited everyone present to share a memory or thought about Queen Mother Isabel's impact on their lives. The stories that emerged painted a picture of a woman who had touched thousands of lives through small acts of kindness and consistent attention to human dignity. An elderly woman from the local care facility spoke about how Queen Mother Isabel had never missed her birthday in 15 years, always bringing a small gift and staying for tea and conversation. A young man who had aged out of foster care described how Queen Mother Isabel's scholarship program had made his university education possible, changing the entire trajectory of his life. A nurse shared how Queen Mother Isabel had held her hand and cried with her during the most difficult day of her career, providing comfort that sustained her through years of challenging work. As the ceremony concluded and guests began to explore the garden on their own, Catherine found herself standing beside the bronze statue of Queen Mother Isabel reading to a child. The sculptor had captured something ineffable in the bronze, not just Queen Mother Isabel's physical likeness, but the warmth and attention she brought to every interaction with young people. Louis appeared beside her, slipping his hand into hers as they contemplated the statue together. "Do you think we did good, Mummy?" he asked, his voice soft with the vulnerability that sometimes emerged when he was thinking deep thoughts. "I think you did magnificently," Catherine replied, squeezing his hand gently. "But, more importantly, I think Great-Granny will be proud of the way you've honored her memory by continuing her work." As the sun set over the memorial garden, painting the roses in shades of gold and amber, Catherine reflected on the journey that had brought them to this moment. Grief had been transformed into purpose, loss had been alchemized into love and action, and Queen Mother Isabel's death had paradoxically ensured that her influence would touch generations yet to be born. The children had learned that saying goodbye didn't mean letting go, but rather finding new ways to carry love forward into the future. In creating this garden, they had built more than a memorial. They had constructed a bridge between past and future, ensuring that Queen Mother Isabel's legacy of kindness and service would continue to bloom and flourish for years to come. Walking back toward the palace as the first stars appeared in the darkening sky, Catherine felt a deep sense of peace. The pain of loss would always be with them, but so would the love, the lessons, and the inspiration that Queen Mother Isabel had woven into the fabric of their lives. And in the garden they had created in her honor, that love would continue to grow and spread, touching the lives of countless people who would find beauty, peace, and inspiration in this living tribute to a woman who had understood that the true measure of a life well lived lies not in the honors received, but in the love shared and the kindness given freely to all who cross our paths.